Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. I'm so happy to bring a guest on with us today, founder and president of Deeper Love International, Mandy Seymour. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you, Dottie. Glad to
Tell
be
our
here.
tell our listeners a little more about what you do.
Well, we educate on social issues related to quality of life, including toxic relationships, human trafficking, domestic abuse, and authoritarian regimes, so that people can understand how they work because they're all part of a related spectrum of violence and how to prevent them, how to break free of them, and how to find hope and healing. And that's our main mission.
Well, and I know you're so good at it. We've worked over the years on and off together in different capacities. I first met you long ago at the World Affairs Council, and no matter where each of us have been, we've kind of reconnected on different projects or needs. And so I'm glad to be here today for our newsletter. So the reason I reached out to you is real timely and important because I saw a testimony at a committee up in Washington, D.C., and it was where multiple people were testifying what happens to the unaccompanied minors. And, there's been public discourse about 325,000 missing children. And I thought we should have a discussion about it because you actually worked in one of the agencies that was mentioned in this testimony. So tell me about your role there and what you were doing.
When I worked with this agency that worked with unaccompanied minors, I was a social worker, I was a caseworker, and my primary job was to do the intake for the children so that I could learn where did they come from, what was their journey like, who is their sponsor or proposed sponsor in the United States. And then I vetted those people to figure out, should we place these kids with those sponsors? Should we recommend sending them back to their home country? What should we do? And that was the primary scope of my role. And then on top of that, I would also talk to the kids about, how do you live in the United States? What do you do? How do you learn the pledge? They attended school in these facilities, so they had class. They had access to legal help and counseling. And so I would set up those meetings as well for them. And then I would try to help explain, if they were given legal rights, which they always had legal rights in this process, what did all that mean for them and how could they understand it so that they knew the whole process, and what was expected of them. Also, in regards to attending school, whenever they left our facility, they were expected to attend school. So we would encourage them on how to attend school and what you need to do. And that if your sponsor, your parents, or whoever it is you're going to doesn't have you go to school and they have you go to work instead, well, that's not supported in our country. We try to explain all these things at a level that they could understand.
And so I know a few times you reached out to me just to get my expert opinion. And can you tell me the patterns you started to see?
Well, as a social worker, we'd be given a caseload, and maybe I would be working on 7 to 10 to 15 cases at a time, which means basically helping 7 to 10 to 15 children at a time to assess their situation and what was going to be in their best interest. And the pattern that I would see is that sometimes these kids would have been sponsored in a very direct way, where there was maybe an aunt or an uncle that was legitimate, waiting in the United States to try to bring them in. And you would just go through the whole process and you would see that, okay, this really is their aunt or uncle. This is their person that they're going to go to. And it was straightforward. It seemed safe enough to place them there, until they had their court hearing that they would have eventually. But the other pattern that I saw is the other side of the coin, which is kids who would come in and there would just be lots of questions that I would have of, okay, wait a second, they're going to this person who sang. Most of the time, many times it would be like an aunt or uncle and a tia, tio. Um, and I would say to myself, wait a second, this person doesn't seem like their aunt or uncle. I don't see a familial relationship. This person can't tell me anything about this kid. They don't seem to really know this kid, but they're saying a lot of the right things, but it's just there's something more going on here. And I would look more deeply and I would find that in these cases, this person really did seem, based on my now 20 years of experience dealing with human trafficking situations and cases, this person seemed far more like a trafficking ring than an actual legitimate family member. And so that was the greatest concern that I had, is that there were times when this system would enable putting these children in the hands of people who really did not show a familial relation at all, but they were saying the right things and the paperwork would be there. And I would object and I would raise my concerns and bring my reports. But there were people who were higher than me who would absolutely refuse to look at all that. And they would just say, these children need to be released into the United States, period. And once they get out in there, they will be free and they will be safe to do whatever they want. And our job is to get them out of here in a timely manner. And I thought, that's not my job. My job is to protect their best interest and to make sure they're safe and that they're going to be able to thrive. And part of the reason that I think this is so important is because what happens is, if you think of the heart and the mind and the desires of these immigrants, the families, the parents, the children, they're wanting to come to the United States to have a better life, to seek a life of what they perceive as the American dream of safety and security and provision and opportunity. But when they come in these trafficking circumstances, they're actually already in danger when they walk across that border because of these preliminary circumstances that have happened to arrange for their passes to begin with through the traffickers, through coyotes, through all of these means. And so they come in here and they're already in danger, which we can talk more about, of course, but they're already endangered. And then you're just releasing them into the hands of these other people who are in our stateside, in our nation, who are further endangering them. And I mean, I watched this visibly happen where these kids would be relocated with these people who are so questionable. There were other cases. There was one child that he was reuniting with his sister, and she did seem like his sister for sure, but she was working in a chicken factory. So they're going through Texas, but she's working in a chicken factory in Mississippi. And one of the requirements of sponsors is they have to show us, as social workers, they had to show us their income. And when she showed me the paycheck she was getting, it wasn't a standard wage. And so I looked into it and I became suspicious of it. And I learned that this was a Chinese chicken factory that the Chinese own in Mississippi. And this lady, I told her, you have legal rights within our country, or you have a provision, a protection, whatever you would call it, where you can actually report that you're not receiving a fair wage and that you are having pressure from your employer in this sense. And they're engaging in labor trafficking. And I could tell, even though I informed her of these things, she was not going to do that because she was too afraid. Because the people who come here, they really are not free. They live in fear every day as immigrants when they're not going through the proper channels of the way that we have our situation for them. But then the sad thing for the child is that whenever he was reunited with her, um, as his sponsor, I had asked him, like, please send him to school. Please let him go to school. He was 17 at the time, and I knew that he could go to school still, but I could tell that she, by her answer she was giving, she was gonna send him straight to the chicken factory. So that child, he more than likely, based on everything I saw, went straight into child labor. And or it wouldn't be child labor, but it would be labor trafficking, you know? And so whenever we say, oh, these kids are missing, they've disappeared, that's never really the case. There's always some kind of strategy and there are a lot of people involved, but the victim has been silenced from the beginning. And so you don't even know what's really going on. But it's not just that kids are just disappearing in our country. There's this whole system that is helping them. And that's what we need to speak out about and expose and explain to people so regular people can understand what's really going on and be part of the solution rather than enabling the problem. They don't even realize that there is a really huge problem that's fixable. We can do something about it. Sorry,
I
that's a
think
long
that's
answer, but
really important because this allows to happen because people are just going on with their day and not complaining that children aren't safe here. And we need to do that. It's as simple as writing or calling your senator or your congressman, either state or federal, all of them, saying, "Hey, I don't want to live in a country where this happens." And then the organization you work for was government sponsored. They were funded by the government to do the work you were doing. And it sounds very much like a New York Times article that I was so fortunate to help the reporter on, where she found unaccompanied minors who were in slaughterhouses working, not in school, not in a safe place for children their age. And she reported on it. And that did get some momentum, but we have to keep it going. That's not where we want to put the most vulnerable children. What do you do with that child, especially if they were in the position of killing animals as a child? What does that mean when they turn 21 if they've had no schooling, they've been working, they've been doing something they didn't want to do that conflicts with their morals? Um, that becomes really problematic when those kids become adults. And that's a whole nother another program. But the point being, imagine how many of those children have been let down and age into adulthood. Their options in life are very limited, and the consequences are very extreme for having those limited choices. I wanted to pick up on another thing you said too, is that the victim was silenced, but you were silenced, weren't you? The advocate that was doing her job. I agree with you. Your job was not to do anything but to protect that child's best interest. And how did that go over?
yes, that is a great question because that really was what was very surprising in this role that I had because I would come forth to my supervisors. I had one person who was above me and one person that was above him, a lady who was above him. And interestingly enough, they both were children of immigrants when they came here. So they were legal, but their parents had migrated. So yet again, they just had these huge hearts of compassion. They were driven by this sense that if the children just get out there, it doesn't really matter because they will be free. And they also felt that because they had these authoritative positions of power, this is my observation. I'm not saying, maybe they would say otherwise, but they would kind of wield their power over the situation and they would discipline me if I objected to something. And so, for example, there was a situation where, well, when I think about who are the most vulnerable children in this whole process, every child is vulnerable. But when people are coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, that's a whole nother area, which most of the children who are at this place, they were from those countries. And when I first got there, I thought, well, why is this? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, where are all the people from Mexico? And it turns out that what I had explained to me is that people from Mexico are pretty savvy because they know the whole system and they're close by. And so what's happening is that the Mexican cartels and the Mexican coyotes, all the different people involved, they will exploit these children and families from these other three nations because they really don't know the perils of the passage. They can make so many more promises, and the people are very trusting. They really have no idea what they're getting into. And so I saw this case firsthand with there's one person in particular that stands out to me, and they did discipline me for this case, and I'll explain it. But this child was from Guatemala, and he had come over here with his father, but both of them spoke Quechuan. And so that was their primary language. And they kind of spoke Spanish, but it was very basic. It was basic enough that I could talk to the child. But whenever I called his dad was with another guy who I will call Juan. Okay. And Juan was the one who was saying he was the uncle and he was going to be the sponsor for this child. And so
Hmm.
I was thinking, well, wait a second, like, why is the father not the sponsor for this child? This doesn't make any sense. It doesn't line up. It's not okay. And every time that I would ask the father questions, all he would do is just, but he would always laugh. And then he would always put the other guy on the phone. So, of course, I was suspicious because, first of all, he doesn't really know what's going on. There's just something wrong. And I just kept saying this over and over to my supervisors, like, I'm not comfortable putting this child in the hands of Juan. Well, they would tell me, you know what, if that's what the father wants, if that's what Juan wants, like the Tio, then that's what you have to do, no matter. And I'm like, but there's just something really wrong. So I kept looking into it further, and I found that this guy Juan, I brought the kid in my office and I asked him one day, I said, how do you know your Tio Juan? And he said, well, when I was a child, of course he's still a child, but when he was like 5, okay, not 14 or 15, which was his age at this time. Juan came to his community and he knelt down to him and he said, oh, hey, do you want to go to America and have a great life? Well, of course, I mean, that's America too, but that's what he asked the kid. And he said, no. And he clutched his mother's leg. And that when he told me that, it just broke my heart because I can imagine this happening. Like this person named Juan, he's known by the community. He's trying to reach out to this little kid and kind of entice him, like at a young age, 5 years old. No, he's way too young to go yet, but he's going to plant that seed. So guess what? That seed grew. And over time, that one guy who I believe was a trafficker, he would go back and forth, travel between the two countries and go build relationships in the community and keep telling the parents your child's going to have a better life when he gets older. I'm going to bring him to the United States. He's going to provide for your family. Which all these kids, I mean, it's like in our country, we when we are in school, we're thinking, okay, how am I going to provide for my family when I get older? But with the Hispanic population, they're thinking, how can I provide for my parents when I get older? It's not just your future family. It's like they really feel this obligation. So the trafficker sees on that and they come and they say this to kids at a young age. They plant those seeds. So when this kid got to be 14 or 15, boom, Juan made passage for him, snatched him up, got him into this country. Then he got caught by immigration. He came to our facility and he's trying to be reunited. And I kept protesting because I'm like, there's just something really wrong. And the more I looked into it, I found that Juan had sponsored, Tio Juan had sponsored 13 children, and they were all in Kentucky, which is where this kid was going to go and where his father was located in one. And I'm like, no, this is a trafficking ring. There's something really wrong here because there's no way this kid, this really isn't his father. These people that he sponsored are not related. He says he's their uncle. He's listed on all of these places as their uncle, and he's not. And my hesitation was further confirmed about 6 or 7 cases later when I was working with a little girl that had come across from Guatemala. And all of a sudden, guess who I see on the sponsorship list? Juan. And I'm like, no, he is not her uncle. And yet again, they refused to listen. And here's how they disciplined me is basically whenever I would have a case that I would object to for the safety and best interest of the child, they would say, you know what? We have the paperwork here that this uncle wants to be his sponsor. We are going to take this case over. And they would either take it over, they would give it to someone else who wasn't objecting to it, and then they would tell me that I had to stay home without pay. And they would literally like make me stay home that day and not come in. And the next day when I came in, the case would be transferred. I would have no access to the case at all. And I would be given a new caseload in its place. And this happened with 3 cases. And I was like, this is crazy. This is absolutely nuts. I cannot believe it. But they will do whatever it takes to hush you. And then whenever they did get on the phone with the people who were from the government, the Homeland Security people, then they would say, oh, everything's great. And this kid should be here. And I mean, everything was all smiles. And we just had glowing reports that everything was just fantastic on our end. And I'm like, it's not. But there was no way to be able to speak out. And to this day, I just wonder what happened to that child. It's so sad. Those 2 children, because like I said, it was 2. Mhm.
Well, it mirrors my experiences when I worked as an legal representative for the children. So I worked in a nonprofit that was not government funded. And I would know as soon as I made contact with a child, I had to have him memorize my phone number and test him on it. Because as soon as they found out we were representing him, that child would disappear from us. And we were their attorneys. I'm not an attorney, but in this particular role, I'm the same as an attorney. I'm their legal representative. I'm their attorney for their court case. And they would disappear them from us as their attorneys. And we we had to develop strategies and methods to not lose them. And that's one thing I did. The executive director of our organization filed lawsuits against these organizations that were moving the children for all kinds of really bad things. I mean, again, another whole episode. But I remember a period of time, and I've seen it replicated since, where they put them on Air Force bases so we couldn't get in to see them, and they could escape any licensing oversight where they were holding them. So to say they're disappeared is an understatement. They're disappeared in many ways. And you doing your job to the description of your job was letting them check the box that their rights had been protected, while all the while silencing you from protecting their rights. So I can imagine how painful every day must have been. And then what was the outcome? Why are you still not there?
Well, eventually the place was shut down because the people who were higher up and even the leader of that organization were mishandling cases and funding. And so they did get shut down at that location. But the organization at large, I mean, it still exists, but it's not on the same scale. Um, and there have been problems, there have been continuous problems, but yet again, people seem to turn a blind eye to this, and it's concerning. There were 2 other cases that I think are really important and shed a light on the issue of what this problem is with immigration and children. Would you like me to share them now or save them for another time? Because I
Sure.
think it's important to give a scope of the big picture of how this all works and what are some solutions that we can bring to this problem. One of them, I had a kid who he claimed he was 17, but he really seemed like he was a 20-year-old. I mean, in my estimation, and he was very precocious and he was very confident and he just didn't seem like a typical kid at all for his age and his claims. And he was from Mexico, but whenever I interviewed him at the beginning, my intake ended up taking 5.5 hours with him. And normally they didn't take that long. They might take 2 hours, maybe two and a half at most, because we had a lot of questions that we would ask them. But I just kept going with this kid because I had concerns. And basically, what came about in my interview with him is that he was saying that he had been kidnapped and he had been taken hostage by these people and they put him in a hotel and all this. But really, it turned out, as I questioned him more, that he was part of the Sinaloa cartel and he was connected. And the Sinaloa cartel had been arranging his passage and they had made him, go to a hotel and he had put some lady over him to watch him and make sure he didn't escape. And he rode on trains and he did all this stuff to get here. And just, it was very clear that he had connections in that regard. And he wasn't behaving like a regular kid, like I said. And he was getting in fights and he was making demands and he was doing all this stuff. And it wasn't really clear who he was going to be sponsored by either. So I brought my concerns yet again to the people in charge. And I'm like, this kid, this is why. And all they could do was be mad that I had spent 5.5 hours on his intake. And I'm like, but this is for the well-being and the best interest, not only of him, but of these other children here. Like this kid is totally different. Like he is violent, he is combative, he's connected to the cartel. Like I don't think this is the place for him. Eventually they did move him to another facility, but I don't know what became of him at that point. But it's another thought that, they really are moving traffickers in. I mean, they didn't make him leave. Like they just moved him to a different kid facility, even though he really did seem older. I'm like, we have to have discernment for people who have different motives who are going through this process. He's not just some innocent kid who doesn't know what's going on. And then there was this other situation I had when you're talking about memorizing phone numbers, where a lot of these kids, because they're kids, they literally sometimes they have a cell phone that they're given, but other times they literally just have a phone number that has been written on a piece of paper in their pocket when they're making this journey. And this one kid came who was about 10 years old and he was really tiny. Yet again, he was from Guatemala and he was so precious and he was just so small. Like you could just tell like didn't really have adequate nourishment growing up, this kind of thing. And he had traveled with his brother who was 18 or older, and they had been apprehended at the border, and his brother was sent to an adult facility, but he was sent to us. And so I said, well, let's call your brother, let's figure out, what about your mom? Do you have a phone number? Well, the phone number had fallen out of his pocket. And I think it's important to know that the kids who come here, first of all, a lot of times they really don't know what they're getting into. And secondly, some of them really don't want to be here. They're just being used. And I saw this firsthand with this kid because he just kept crying and crying every day. He's like, I don't want to be here. I don't know why my parents sent me here. I need to go back home so that I can help my mom and dad to carry their firewood. Who is going to carry their firewood for them? And I mean, he really, every day he would come in my office and cry. And he's like, I don't know the phone number. And I'm trying everything to help this kid find the connection and the info, but I can't. We're not having any success. So finally, I'm like, look, we just need to pray. Let's pray that you find that number, that you remember it. And because what else do you do? I mean, at some point, like we really do. I mean, we have to work hard and pray. That's my philosophy. It's like we have to do both because we really need, just support on all these levels. And so one day he came in my office and he said, I remembered it. I remembered the phone number. And he did. And he was able to tell me. And we called his mama. And she's like,
Oh,
my son my son. And she was so happy to talk to him. And guess what happened? Like they connected us with the uncle, which I think it really did seem like an uncle that was there, that was supposed to have him. And I said, look, this kid does not want to go live here. Like he is not interested at all. He is really having a hard time. I don't think it's in his best interest. And thank goodness that man agreed. And so we sent the kid back home, which you don't hear about these stories either. But guess what? There's something wonderful that happened for him because, okay, I'm a caseworker. I'm supposed to just do my job, but I like to go above and beyond because I really want these kids to succeed and thrive. And so I just kept asking around. I'm like, what is going to happen to this kid when he goes home? He wants to carry firewood for his parents, but he needs to go to school and we need to make sure that he has food and he's nourished because he's so tiny. Like, what is he going to end up eating? And, I'm concerned for him. And there was a program that, um, it was a nonprofit that actually works with these kids when they do send them back home. And I was able to connect with them and apply for him to be a part of their program. And so they ended up, and this is something sponsored in the United States. And they ended up meeting him at the airport, bringing his parents to meet him in Guatemala. They gave him clothing, they gave him shoes. He would not have
Oh,
had he they also sent him to school. They sent someone to make sure that he went to school. He also was able to get the food that he needed and make sure that his family was provided for on that end. And I just think that is an amazing thing. And then the other part that was really precious about this is we forget people really are leaving their homes and their lives that they have had in that place. And I thought, okay, with this kid, what am I going to do with him? Because I don't need to be working on his case, moving him forward and teaching him how to live in the United States. So, what can we do when he comes to my office for an hour and we visit? And I thought, I'm going to have him show me and tell me about life in Guatemala. And so we pulled up some videos on YouTube of his city where he lived. And it was so sweet because he was like, oh, there's so and so, and here's this person, and here's that person in my community, and so and so. And I mean, he knew everyone that was in this video, and they were celebrating some kind of a wedding. And he was like, I remember that wedding. I was there. And as I was working with this kid, I was like, he knows everyone in this village and he loves them so dearly. So I turned to him and I'm like, you know what? One day you could be the mayor of this village. Like, I think that would be an awesome goal for you. And I really felt like he really could. And I feel like even now he really can. And so he was inspired. And I mean, he's only this little 10-year-old, but I think it's really true. And so helping people to have success where they live and where they are is the other part of this journey that like we need to invest more in the opposite direction, however we can to sustain life there, because who knows, hopefully that support had a ripple effect for others. And even if it didn't, I mean, just changing that one life for the better in that way is just so exciting. So there's this beautiful side to immigration that is like that is one of my favorite stories because it's like reverse immigration. Like we sent him home and now he's going to make a difference and solve those problems in his own land. And he won't have to go somewhere else to try to find safety and security because he's got support now.
I agree. And it's so beautiful that you went above and beyond, as I'm sure that wasn't how at least your organization envisioned that turning out. I imagine they were not even prepared for that one.
No, no.
I love it. I have a piggyback story to that. Just shortly, I helped a woman return to Korea, and she was 19, so she was an adult but still a child, still a teenager. And she didn't speak a lot of English. And I had 10 days with her as I was working the mechanisms to get her returned home. She had been trafficked, sex trafficked, it'd been a bad deal for her. And so about 6 weeks after I get her home, maybe a month, sometime after I know she's made it home. And again, from authorities, I knew, I didn't know from her. I'm in my office, I'm busy, my phone rings, I pick it up. And she just says in English, it's snowing in Korea. To which I laughed out loud because that was an inside joke between us. And she made it home and she was happy. So after the trafficking and stuff she'd been through, she's like, I don't want any more of this US stuff. That is not what I wanted. And she went home. So I think it's
Wow.
important those two stories remind us that we can help, because I think a lot of times we think America is the dream, and it is, but it's also the nightmare. And depending on who we're working with, if we can help them, find the dream, which you did, is beautiful. I think that's a wonderful, uplifting way to end this, and to say, I'm going to put a link to the testimony and the hearing underneath this, and I hope people will listen to it and they will make their own opinions. We're just bringing our discussion forward based on our experiences, and mine working 6 years as a legal advocate, yours working as a victim advocate. And everyone can be an advocate on whatever level it is, whether it's calling your representative and saying, hey, what is going on here? Because I'm going to guess no one ever called you when they found out there were problems with the facility. No one ever called you to say, where are these kids? Are they okay?
Never.
So
Mm-mm.
you're wondering about them every day. You've done what you can do in your capacity. We're still speaking out in this newsletter for those kids. Where's the answers? Where is the protection? Because it's not there. And my mantra is, I want the world to be safe for moms and children. I'd like it to be safe for everyone, but I can tell you right now, it is not safe for moms and children. And that's the lowest bar we should aspire to. And I thank you and commend you for your work, because you reached that bar. You were making the place safer for children, no matter what it cost you, literally cost you for doing so. So tell folks where they can find you.
You can find us at deeperlove.net. So that's our website, and we'd love to connect and encourage you in the journey to take action and to be a part of the solution.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure we'll have more stories to tell. But I think this is the most important one we can tell right now. Because, if people, two things I want to leave them with. One, that border goes both ways. There is no count of how many US citizen children are gone out of our border. And I have a mom whose son has been taken out of the US, which I'll have her on. And I've worked cases of US citizens taken out of the US. There's no count when you leave. It's only when you come in. And that number of 325,000 children are missing in the US that are unaccompanied. How many are missing from the US? We don't even know. And chances are that number might even be bigger. And then the second thing is, none of us are without being affected by this. Because if you take a moment and imagine, what if we had no future? What if we had no children, or the children we have are so damaged that they can't reach their potential? And then go about your day and think about, what does it matter what I do today if that is robbed from us? And that's what's happening. Our future is being destroyed. So everybody, parent or not, advocate or not, child or not, adult or not, is all affected by this. And we need to step up and stop it. So thank you for your voice.
Thank you, Dottie, and thank you for everything that you're doing to be such an amazing heroine to all these children and moms and people in this world. You are one of my inspirations, and I'm just really, really grateful for you and all that you do.
Well, thank you. And I'm honored to be here and can't wait till I'm not needed. I'm going to go gardening and ride horses.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Bye.